The three heavy hitters in the van world are going to be the Mercedes Sprinter, the Ford Transit, and the Ram ProMaster. We're going to go over the pros and cons of these three vehicles and which one is going to best suit your needs. The number one van that we build is the Mercedes Sprinter. The Mercedes Sprinter is by far and away the smoothest interior van to build around. They're more designed and centric to having something built inside of them. They've been doing this kind of stuff for quite some time now. You also have a lot more exterior options that just bolt onto the outside. And these exterior options, although they cost a little bit more, look by far and away the best. The Achilles heel of Mercedes at this point is going to be maintenance. Everyone wants these vans, and if you live in a populated area such as the Front Range, Colorado area, it can be very, very difficult to get your van serviced in reasonable time frames. But if you live out in the middle of, say Middle America, it may be a little bit easier to get your van into dealerships. There's a lot of proprietary information working with these vans that you need to bring, it needs to go to a Mercedes dealership in order to get worked on. Other than that, walls, very smooth, holes, very even. It's a wonderful van to build, and it's the easiest van to build.
Yeah, like Aaron mentioned, there are a lot more options for the Mercedes Sprinters. If you're looking for a roof rack, chances are you have 10 different options for the Sprinter. For a Transit or for a ProMaster, you might have 2 or 3. So your selection of options are a lot better in the Sprinter. And also, if you've ever stepped inside of any of these, the Mercedes feels like a luxury vehicle. When you're in the front cab and you're driving it, it feels like a nice vehicle. Whereas if you take a look at the Transit and the ProMaster, which they're starting to update, it feels more like you're in a cargo van. A lot of the technology hasn't been updated, and that I think is one of the best things about the Sprinter is, you might go on a cross-country road trip and you want to be comfortable in your van, especially when you're driving it, and that's the nice thing about the Sprinter as well.
If you were going to go buy a new van, it doesn't matter which van you get, I always suggest getting the extended warranty with these kind of things, because although the Mercedes does last a long time, when it does require maintenance, it typically isn't cheap. It does use a diesel engine. They are starting to make gasoline engines, but diesel components, generally speaking, cost a little bit more than gas vehicles. And with it being a Mercedes, there's a price tag to that name as well. But it is the van that has the sex appeal, it is the van that everyone wants, and it is the best looking van.
While they're more expensive to work on, you have to find a certified diesel mechanic, things like that. Or, during these days, it might take 6 months just to get an oil change. The nice thing is that typically when it's less often you're gonna need that service, which is something to think about as well. Maybe the Ford, it's easier to get serviced, but you might need that service more often. So there's kind of trade-offs to both of them. And like Aaron said, it's one of the few that runs on diesel. Transits and ProMasters are gas engines.
Ford has been making some pretty big leaps and bounds with their vehicles. They recognize that there is a market. They're starting to make their EcoBoost, which is a turbocharged V6. And if you've ever driven a non-turbo Transit, you see quickly that this is a huge improvement, because the van is a dog without these turbos. They also have a much more comfortable cockpit, which is very enjoyable. You don't want if you're taking a lot of road trips, uncomfortable seats, they get old fast. But Ford is really, really starting to recognize that there is a need for all-wheel drive. So you see a lot more of these all-wheel drive vans as well, which if you do a lot of traveling in the wintertime, it may be something that's very, very nice to have. Good wheels and tires maybe just won't cut it. So keep that kind of thing in mind. And right now, it's gonna be Sprinter or Transit for an all-wheel drive system. The Transit also has a little bit more of a builder-friendly interior as well. It's a little more square. You do have one large wire harness moving through the driver's side of the van that you have to build around, but that's not such a huge deal. They have improved the front end of the ceiling to make it a little bit easier to build around as well, but there aren't too many pain points. There are a couple sections within the Transit that have this metal that is incredibly difficult to drill through. Sharper drill bits, higher quality drill bits are definitely going to be your friend if you're building out a Ford Transit.
The third option we're going to talk about that we're going to explain kind of in depth is the Ram ProMaster. It is the only one that we've talked about so far that is front wheel drive specific. The other ones are typically rear wheel drive or have that all wheel drive, four wheel drive option. It's also gas, whereas we talked about the Sprinter is diesel, which is nice. And usually the Ram ProMaster is a fan favorite for the DIY builder. They typically come in at a lesser price than the Sprinters or the Transits do. And you can find a lot of them in the used market because a lot of industrial companies use ProMasters. So you can usually find a ProMaster for a good price as well.
One thing about the ProMaster is, although it looks very, very square from the outside, the inside is anything but. You do have some pretty crazy C-pillars that you do have to build around. Walls aren't on the same planes, and then the floors have a little bit of a tilt upwards, so your cabinets have the propensity to lean inwards unless you build for it, or level your floor out. On the outside, the ProMasters look super simple, but I would say that's probably one of the harder vehicles to build, just to make look very, very pretty. So if you are in the DIY market, keep these little things in mind when building your ProMaster. When we see a lot of these DIY ProMasters, we do see people frame out their walls to gain a square wall. So just know, if you want to make it look perfect and beautiful, there might be a little bit more work involved with a ProMaster.
So one thing to consider too is whether you're looking at used or new. Usually when people are coming to us to do a build out, we always recommend new. You know, you get the warranty options, you get that convenience of having a new vehicle. You can finance it probably a little easier. But then the other thing to consider with a used cargo vehicle specifically is that usually it's going to be used the way they were originally built and meant to be used. You know, you might find a used ProMaster that hauled around bricks for 10 years of its life, and it's just been used like what it was meant to be used for originally. So you can find that they're just in rougher shape when you get them used. And I don't know if you've ever rented a car, Aaron, but I always floor it when I rent a car. And I'm sure employees for these companies do the same thing. They're not thinking about treating them kindly. It's a work vehicle.
Take it to a mechanic if you don't understand vehicles. Like, have it looked over. Look at the floor. Is the floor smashed up? Is there clunking in the drivetrain? Is the suspension shot? How does the sliding door work? Those are some of the big things we see with used vehicles, is the sliding door gets pretty gnarly. You know, little stuff. If it's a used car and you're okay with all these little things, no big deal. But I would highly recommend having a professional look over your vehicle before making any big purchases.
We've talked about kind of the main three that we do build outs on, but there are a lot of other vehicles out there. You know, there's the Nissan Envy. You might get a used Penske truck that you want to build out in the back of. There are a lot of options people use for adventure vehicles. Use Subarus, 4Runners. And for the most part, a lot of the things we're going to teach in this course can still be applied to those things. They may not just be specific towards those vehicles. You know, in the end, insulation is insulation. If you want to put insulation in your big box truck, you know, the things we're going to teach here are still going to apply for that.
Our goal here is when you get finished with this course, you have a skill set of good practices. So just like Max said, it doesn't matter what vehicle you use, but mounting cabinets, insulation, how to run your water lines, and how to wire a vehicle, these are all applicable. So again, we're trying to set you up for success. Doesn't matter what vehicle you use.